The moment the champagne bottle exploded and sprayed over the mounted flat screen in the break room, I already knew they weren't going to pay me. Not in money, not in credit, not in basic human decency. The system I built, line by line, sleepless night by sleepless night, just hit 400% above projected traffic. Real-time usage metrics rolled across the monitor like fireworks. API uptime was flawless, the dashboards were responsive. Cross-departmental reporting was humming like a goddamn Tesla coil. The product was alive, breathing, efficient, and stable. That wasn't luck, that was me. People clapped, marketing posted celebratory selfies. Sales handed out those corny foil balloons that said success. I stood off to the side sipping lukewarm water and watching my own work being passed around like a corporate party trick. I wasn't mad, not yet. Just tired. I am 55 years old, and I have spent the better part of 3 decades navigating the treacherous waters of corporate IT infrastructure. I know how this game is played, and I know exactly what it looks like when a company decides that the architect is no longer necessary once the house is built. Then the manager strolled in. Gavin was the kind of guy who wore an expensive haircut and a permanent smirk. He patted me on the shoulder like a dog who didn't bite the guests. "Hey, quick thing," he said like it was an afterthought. "Your bonus isn't going through the cycle. Policy stuff, you get it." I blinked. Policy? Yeah, upper levels are cracking down on post-launch bonuses, he said, already turning to walk away. It's not personal, not personal. Like my weekend spent babysitting database failures weren't personal. Like the clause I negotiated in our licensing contract, line 13.2, subsection D, third-party retention condition, wasn't damn personal. Like the blood in my coffee wasn't personal. I didn't respond, didn't scream, didn't pull a dramatic stunt and flip the printer off its tray. I nodded once and said, "Got it." What I really got was this. They thought I was replaceable. They thought the man who rebuilt their data stack from the ashes of a contractor's half-finished garbage heap could be filed under cost containment. That policy was an acceptable insult to someone who literally negotiated the terms of legal use for the company's analytics vendor. That I wouldn't notice the way Gavin flinched when he said it. That I'd just keep showing up smiling like a cog in the machine that I built. I walked back to my desk. The noise of the room dimmed like someone turned down the treble on reality. My inbox was full of congratulations and requests for quick calls. Everyone wanted something, metrics, charts, proof the system was real, and not just smoke and mirrors. I gave them what they wanted. No edge in my voice, no delay in delivery, but something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not revenge, not yet. Just a calm clinical understanding. They were now using a system whose legal operating status was tied to one line in a contract that no one but me had bothered to read, and that line had one condition: my employment and compensation. So when Gavin handed me that non-answer and walked away like I was lucky to still have a badge, he wasn't just stiffing me a bonus. He was pulling the pin on the very grenade I had buried in the foundation of their precious platform. All I had to do now was let gravity take its course. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't run to HR. I didn't message my best friends in legal. I just opened my encrypted folder, found the PDF, highlighted the clause, and stared at it for a long moment. I remembered the meeting with the vendor, remembered how hard I had to fight to get that clause included. I wasn't even supposed to be negotiating. Gavin had dropped the ball, of course, but I stepped in, spent 2 weeks wrangling red lines and vendor-side counsel just to protect myself, just in case. Just in case they ever decided to screw me like this. The corporate environment is a fascinating ecosystem. It is a place where competence is often punished with more work, and incompetence is rewarded with promotion. Gavin was the perfect example of this paradox. He had failed upwards, surfing on the achievements of his technical team while presenting their late-night heroics as his own strategic vision. He had a habit of using words like synergy, bandwidth, and paradigm shift without actually understanding how a single piece of software functioned. To him, the data warehouse was just a magic box that produced colorful charts for his quarterly presentations. He didn't care about the intricacies of the ETL pipelines, the complexity of the data transformations, or the delicate balance of the API rate limits. He only cared that the numbers looked good when he stood in front of the executive board, and now he was trying to steal my bonus. A bonus of $150,000 that was explicitly promised for delivering the project under budget and ahead of schedule. A bonus that I had earned by sacrificing my health, my sleep, and my personal life for the past 18 months. He thought he could just brush it off as a policy change. He thought I would just accept it because I was an older engineer, someone who should just be grateful to have a job in a youth-obsessed industry. He vastly underestimated me. I went back to my inbox, sent out 3 high-priority reports, answered a couple of technical questions from product, and scheduled a sync for Monday. I smiled, waved to the intern, laughed at a joke I didn't hear. Then I opened a fresh email, addressed it to legal, typed 4 words in the subject line. FYI, potential issue. Monday morning smelled like stale donuts and denial. The confetti had barely been vacuumed out of the hallway rugs when the email blasts began. Subject lines like incredible teamwork and historic win for the organization were pinging inboxes like tiny corporate fireworks. And in each one there were the same oily fingerprints. Senior leadership patting themselves on the back for my work. The official postmortem dropped around 10:06 a.m. It was a neat PDF dressed in charts I designed, colored in branding I customized, stitched together with metrics pulled directly from my system's spine. There was a 2-page summary of the architecture written in third person, like it was discovered in a field instead of engineered over 2 years of unpaid weekends. And nowhere did it say my name. The authors were listed as the product lead, the VP of operations, and Gavin. The man who once asked me if Python was the snake one had signed off on a technical overview that included phrases I wrote verbatim in a messaging app 6 weeks ago. My name was gone. My contributions were reduced to vague references about cross-functional input. I wasn't a person. I was a bullet point. I didn't say a word. There were no passive-aggressive emoji reactions, no replies looping myself in. I simply opened a new local folder and labeled it insurance. I started dragging copies, chat threads, design drafts, version histories, and architecture diagrams with timestamps. This was not done in anger but in preparation. A war doesn't start with a cannon blast. It starts with someone quietly sharpening a knife. By noon, the murmurs started. One of the operations engineers asked if anyone had cleared the final vendor clauses with legal before the system went live. Some weird stuff in Appendix D, he said casually, sipping from his mug. I kept my eyes on my screen, cleaning up post-launch cash reports. A project manager replied, "Legal probably skimmed it, right? I mean, nothing's come up." I smiled faintly. It was the kind of smile you give a magician right before he realizes the rabbit is chewing through his sleeve. I took my lunch late, around 1:45 p.m., when the break room cleared out. Leftover cake was still there, dry chocolate sheet cake with frosting that had crusted over like spackle. Someone had written success in red icing across the top. The letter U looked like it had been drawn by a toddler mid-tantrum. Appropriate, I thought. I sat by the window, not hungry, just absorbing, watching. Ian from HR walked by laughing with someone from sales. Product was already talking fourth-quarter goals like we hadn't just survived a firestorm. I didn't need to swing yet, I just needed to wait, let the silence stretch. Let Gavin forget what he skimmed. Let leadership polish their boots on my back a little longer. Let the rope tighten. Because the moment they made it official that I was unpaid, unacknowledged, and erased, that clause would activate like a tripwire. I left at 6 p.m. Not a second later, just like any other day, but I walked out holding a hard drive in my bag, encrypted, time-stamped, complete with a backup of the infrastructure dependency. Because when the system fails, they will need a miracle. And I have already decided I won't be in the building when they beg for one. The license was sitting in a folder no one else remembered, not even the procurement team. I had labeled it with one of those boring file names that practically screamed ignore me to anyone without a working understanding of versioning law. It was named Vendor License Final Executed version 7.pdf. It had been sitting there since the day I signed it, tucked into a digital drawer like a loaded gun no one thought I would ever use. But I remembered every single line. It was a Wednesday when the atmosphere started to shift. Everyone was still high on caffeine and ego from the launch. Gavin had started calling the system our baby in meetings, his voice taking on this weird paternal tone like he had been there for more than 5 approvals and a lunch where he asked what a data warehouse was. They were already talking about expanding it to other departments, maybe even monetizing the metrics. A roadmap was forming, one built entirely on the spine of the platform I had architected, and they still hadn't paid me, so I opened the file. The clause was exactly where I remembered it. Appendix D, subsection 3, paragraph B, single sentence. One legal needle buried in a haystack of whereas and therefore. It read, in the event that the designated technical lead as defined in Addendum B is removed from compensated employment status for any period exceeding 72 hours, this license agreement shall be considered null and void, with all associated access rights terminated without further notice. There was no gray area, no ambiguity. It was a pure black and white kill switch. That clause didn't exist by accident. It was born out of spite. 2 years ago, Gavin and his executives tried to outsource the analytics rebuild to a contractor in another state, someone who bragged about 10x engineering and thought documentation was optional. I caught the messages by mistake. They were ready to cut me out entirely. They said I was too protective, overly opinionated, and my salary was a cost inefficiency. So I made a call to the vendor. I explained the situation. I said we needed stronger language. I made them put my name in the contract. If they wanted to use their software, I had to be paid. Not just employed, but compensated fully, including all bonuses. I wanted to make sure they would never get to erase me quietly. And now they were standing on a legal landmine with both feet. I minimized the window, took a sip of my coffee, and drafted a new message to our internal legal counsel, Sarah. No drama, no warning shots, just 4 lines. Subject FYI potential issue. Hi Sarah, looping you in on the analytics license, specifically Appendix D. There may be compliance implications if the current compensation structure isn't aligned. Attaching for your review. I attached the contract, the PDF original with signature and timestamp. I let the document speak for itself. Then I hit send. Nothing dramatic happened immediately. There were no bells, no fire alarms, but as soon as I clicked that little paper airplane icon, the entire game changed. Because now it wasn't just about feelings, it wasn't about fairness or recognition, it was about legality. It was about governance. It was about Title 17 U.S.C. Section 504 of the Copyright Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It was about how fast a company can fall apart when the one person who actually read the contract decides to stop protecting them from their own laziness. I didn't watch for the read receipt. I didn't refresh to see if she replied. I just leaned back, stretched my neck, and listened to the hum of the servers my code still fed. They could keep pretending I didn't matter. But now every breath the system took was technically illegal, and I was the only one who could revive it. The first sign was the silence. Not the absence of noise, but targeted silence. The kind that spreads in pockets, the kind that is engineered. Legal contacted Gavin on Thursday morning. I know this because Sarah, our lead counsel, copied me in the message. It was just a brief, polite ask for clarification around the analytics licensing structure. Following up on Appendix D, she wrote with all the dispassionate calm of a surgeon prepping a scalpel. Gavin didn't respond, not immediately. Not even after she followed up with, just want to confirm current compensation alignment to ensure license compliance. He left it unread for 6 hours. I watched his status bounce between active and in a meeting, the little green dot flickering like a heartbeat. Then something curious happened. I got removed from the operations chat channel. There was no warning, no explanation, just poof. 1 second I was there reading a thread about integrating new endpoints. The next I was staring at a message saying I no longer had access to this workspace, like I had been voted off the island. The same thing happened with the morning stand-up invite. It vanished from my calendar. I only noticed when I saw a screen share notification pop up from the virtual room I was supposed to be in. It blinked, then disappeared. They were icing me out. By lunchtime, I had 43 systems linked to my codebase. By the end of the day, I had 68. By midnight, there were 92. Each one got its own line. Each one had a short description, timestamp, owner, and failure condition. I added a final column, breakpoint without license. Spoiler alert, most of them would collapse within 72 hours of a vendor audit. Gavin's gamble wasn't just arrogant, it was suicidal. And still there was no reply from him. No response to legal, no course correction, just silence and soft isolation. They were betting I would go quietly. They thought I didn't have receipts, that I wasn't vindictive enough, powerful enough, or legally insulated enough to pull the trigger. What they didn't realize is that I built the damn trigger. I installed the wiring. I wrote the clause. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to storm into a conference room with a folder and a grudge. All I had to do was wait. I spent Friday morning exporting backup logs, storing dependency maps, and encrypting everything under a secure key stored on an offline drive. I didn't want revenge. I wanted evidence. If they came groveling, I wanted the power to say no. If they came attacking, I wanted to gut them in 3 clicks. The fire hadn't reached them yet. But the smoke was coming through the vents. The meeting wasn't on anyone's calendar. There was no subject line, no prep document, no chat notifications. It was just a string of quiet shoulder taps from legal. Sarah was pulling a handful of names into conference room C like she was assembling a jury before a sentencing. Inside was Gavin, red-faced and bored. Ian from HR was chewing gum like he was at a high school pep rally. A finance analyst fresh out of grad school looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Sarah sat at the end, her laptop open, fingers steepled like she was praying or about to sentence someone to hell. I wasn't invited. Of course not. But I didn't need to be, because I already knew what file was open on her screen. The clause, Appendix D, the noose. Sarah had been digging, the kind of digging only lawyers with good instincts and bad sleep schedules do. She had read the contract. She actually read it and understood what Gavin hadn't. That the license wasn't just a formality. It was a living contract, a heartbeat agreement. And the heart, that was me. I want to verify something, she started calmly, her voice low like a bomb technician talking through a wire snip. Is our technical lead currently being compensated in accordance with his employment agreement? Ian spoke first, like it was a softball question. Yes, of course. He is active. He hasn't been terminated. Sarah didn't flinch. That wasn't the question. Has he been paid his performance bonus? A pause. The finance analyst flipped through a spreadsheet, frowning. His bonus is still under review. I don't see a disbursement yet. Gavin jumped in too fast. He was eager. We are still evaluating performance metrics tied to the rollout. I mean, the team did great, obviously, but there is some policy-level stuff around post-launch incentive triggers that we need to sort out. Sarah held up a hand. Then she closed her laptop. It wasn't slammed, it wasn't passive-aggressive, it was just a quiet, final closing like a lid on a coffin. She looked at them, really looked at them, and said, "If he is unpaid, we are in breach." Ian blinked. In breach of what? Sarah pointed to the laptop, which was now shut. Clause 13.2, subsection D, the license agreement that gives us legal access to 97% of our analytics infrastructure. The clause that requires the architect to be in compensated employment status in order for that license to remain valid. Gavin tried to laugh. That's just boilerplate. No. Sarah said so softly it made the air go cold. It's not. The room went completely still. Sarah leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. If this isn't fixed, we are out of compliance, which means our access to the system is illegal. Under Title 17 U.S.C., Section 504 of the Copyright Act, we are willfully infringing on the vendor's intellectual property. Furthermore, under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, any continued access to their API without a valid license constitutes unauthorized access, which means every dashboard, every report, and every investor call using that data becomes massive legal exposure. Which means you, she turned to Gavin, need to explain why you failed to process a compensation clause that has operational kill switch language attached. Gavin looked like a man slowly realizing his parachute was actually a gym bag. I didn't know, he mumbled. You were in the loop, she replied. You signed the disbursement delay form. You authorized the review freeze. The finance analyst cleared his throat. We thought it was standard, nobody mentioned. Sarah cut him off. It is not standard, it is negligence. Behind the glass wall, someone from IT walked past holding a flickering monitor. Outside, the world kept spinning, but inside that room the fire had landed. They just didn't realize yet that it had already started burning through the floor. The catastrophe started with a missed email. At 3:12 a.m., the automated report for global sales reconciliation didn't land in the CFO's inbox. There was no bounce back, no error trail, just nothing. At 3:34 a.m., an intern on the East Coast shift sent a message with the kind of innocent panic only interns can pull off. Hey, are the dashboards down or am I just doing something wrong? By 4 a.m., the engineering group chat was a war zone. No one could access the analytics cluster. The container logs were clean. There were no deployments overnight, no infrastructure outages. But the API keys were throwing 403 forbidden errors from the vendor. Then came the message. It wasn't from me. It wasn't from legal. It was from the system itself. Every executive dashboard, board metrics, investor KPIs, churn heat maps, and customer lifetime value projections refreshed with a single crimson banner. License unrecognized. Contact account owner. That was the clause. That was the line in Appendix D flipping its middle finger to every single one of them because they hadn't paid me. By 6:45 a.m., Gavin's voicemail was full. So was his inbox. So was his soul, probably. People started hovering near his door like kids watching a house fire. I watched the whole thing from the break room, my feet up, sipping burnt office coffee from a chipped mug. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even smiling. I just existed. Calm, present, a ghost in the machine. By 7:30 a.m., the issue had escalated to legal. Legal had escalated to Sarah. Sarah didn't message me. She didn't have to. By 8:02 a.m., she was outside the CEO's office, a black binder in her hand. I could see her through the glass wall, speaking low and fast, her face pale but composed. Nolan, the CEO, looked confused, then concerned, then incredibly still. By 8:15 a.m., the emergency meeting was called. There was no virtual link, no calendar invite. It was in person only. The subject line on the invite said one word, urgent. I was not invited again, but that didn't matter. My name was already in the room. Gavin tried to spin it. Of course he did. He said it was a technical hiccup, a vendor handshake misfire. Sarah slid the contract across the table. Clause 13.2, subsection D, termination upon non-compensated status of the designated technical lead. The room was quiet. Nolan asked, "Is this real?" Sarah just nodded. "Is he still on payroll?" Ian from HR shook his head. Gavin tried to talk but got waved off like a mosquito. I was still in the break room, still sipping, watching someone from marketing sob quietly into a granola bar. The second alert hit the screens. Data pipeline suspended due to license breach. You could feel the panic start to rip through the walls because this wasn't a bug. This was compliance. This was exposure. Every dashboard, every report, every investor-ready projection they had prepped for the quarterly call was now, legally speaking, inadmissible. They could fire me, sure. They just couldn't run the company after they did. I opened my laptop, clicked refresh, and watched their world freeze in real time. Then I finished my coffee. It tasted better than usual. The room was full, but no one breathed. Not when Sarah opened the black binder. Not when she clicked her pen with that little snap that always sounded like a warning shot. Not even when she said the name of the clause aloud like a priest reciting scripture at the gallows. The projector was off, the blinds were drawn. There were no charts, no slide decks, no spin, just printed paper and the collective heart rate of 5 executives realizing they had stepped on a landmine. Sarah looked up, as calm as a storm that had already passed through. "Please tell me you paid him," she said. Her eyes locked on Gavin like a blade at his throat. He stammered. He is employed, active status. He hasn't been terminated. That is not what I asked, Sarah replied, her tone colder than corporate laminate. Was he paid his bonus? A long pause followed. Then finally, Ian admitted his bonus was withheld. It is still under internal review. Sarah blinked once, closed the binder with surgical precision, then flipped it back open to a new page. It was highlighted, underlined, and notarized. Then she said, Nolan, you better call your investors. Silence detonated in the room. The CFO visibly paled. The VP of sales started rubbing his temples like he could physically squeeze the consequences out. Nolan didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at the paper like it might catch fire on its own. Gavin opened his mouth again, trying to laugh. Come on, this is just exaggerated legalese, right? These kinds of clauses are rarely enforced. Sarah cut in immediately. It is enforceable. The vendor confirmed it. I contacted their compliance lead this morning. They cross-reference his employment status with their database access logs. If he is unpaid, we are operating without a license. That violates Title 17 U.S.C. Section 504 and potentially the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We are looking at millions in statutory damages. He tried again. There has to be a grace period. There is not, she said, flipping to another page. 72 hours, that window expired last night at 11:43 p.m. Gavin was now visibly sweating. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water bottle. I didn't know, he muttered. No one told me the clause was real. You signed the contract, Sarah replied, already turning toward the door, and he flagged it in writing twice. That was when they truly realized this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some fluke of paperwork or miscommunication. This was a professional system designed by someone they thought was disposable, held together by a clause none of them had read because it wasn't in a bullet point presentation. Sarah paused at the door. I will draft the disclosure. Let me know if you want me to include your names. Then she walked out. Just like that, there was no gavel, no smoke, just reality settling like dust. By noon, the building had the quiet hum of a funeral home. Phones still rang, but nobody answered. The chat channels were graveyards of confused questions and radio silence. Nolan's assistant Power walked past my desk 3 times in 15 minutes, carrying a laptop and muttering in panic. The implosion had begun. Investor dashboards were inaccessible. Customer churn analytics were gone. Forecasting reports were pulling data so stale it still referenced a discontinued product line. People were rebooting routers like it would resurrect the system. Marketing blamed IT. IT blamed the vendor. The vendor sent back a single brutal line in an email. Your license is invalid due to breach. Please contact your designated account lead for reinstatement. The account lead was me. I wasn't watching the chaos with popcorn. I was working on something else. Cleaning up some side scripts for a freelance contract I had lined up. They would be paying me in cryptocurrency and respect. It was already a better deal than what this place offered. Around 12:40 p.m., a junior staffer from HR walked over holding a printed form like it was a hostage note. Hey, Gavin was wondering if maybe you could help us draft some transition documentation, he asked, his voice cracking mid-sentence. I looked up and blinked once. You mean documentation for a system I cannot legally access anymore, I asked. He turned red. Well, yeah, but just so the team can keep things moving. I took a slow sip of my tea, then said evenly, tell Gavin I am not available, and next time don't send someone who doesn't understand what the word breach means. He shuffled off without a word. The call came at 6:42 p.m. Just as I was pouring myself a glass of wine and feeding the cat, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. It was a direct dial, no caller ID mask, no assistant buffer. That meant one thing. I answered with one word. Yes. There was a pause long enough to hear his breath catch. Then what will it take? There was no greeting, no introduction, just gravel in the throat and desperation wrapped in a necktie. It was Nolan, the CEO, not his proxy, not his assistant, not some groveling PR script. Him. I walked to my desk, sat down, and opened the folder labeled "They are going to beg." Inside was a PDF drafted by my attorney, titled Reinstatement and Buyout Proposal Executed Upon License Breach. We had prepared it 2 weeks ago before the launch, before Gavin got cute, before HR thought policy was more important than the person building their future. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch like piano wire. Then I clicked forward. The subject line read, Your offer window, 24 hours. The document contained 3 bullet points. 1. Immediate wire transfer of unpaid compensation of $150,000 plus a 40% breach penalty. 2. Buyout of the license clause for mid-6 figures executed through outside counsel. 3. A written statement acknowledging my contribution to be read at the next company-wide all-hands meeting. I heard him open the email. You could feel the moment the number hit his optic nerve. There was nothing for 10 seconds. Then quietly, we should have just paid you the damn bonus. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't laugh. I didn't throw confetti. I just said, you have until the close of business tomorrow. Then the vendor gets the breach escalation to federal regulators. Click. There was no goodbye, no theatrics. I sat back, took a sip of wine, and watched my email for a wire confirmation. The dashboard stayed dark all night. The board didn't get their third quarter burn rate report. Investors kept refreshing pages that now read Error 403, license offers required. And me, I watered my plants. I watched the sunset. I felt the weight of silence. That beautiful golden silence when the system you built finally speaks for you louder than any speech ever could. They didn't just break a contract. They proved I was the only one holding the damn place together. And now they were paying for it on my exact terms.